Hello and welcome to Tech Raven. I'm Nigel Cooper and today I'm reviewing Mark Ronson's online BBC Maestro music production course. I know, but before you click away from this video, don't. Trust me, you're going to want to hear about this one. Now, we've all seen adverts popping up all over YouTube with so-called music producers trying to sell you yet another damn course, but this is Mark Ronson we're talking about here and not some self-proclaimed expert on music production. If you don't know who Mark Ronson is, just Google him, check out his wiki page, and you'll soon find out that he's one of the most prolific songwriters and music producers in the world today. He's worked and co-written and produced records for the likes of Duran Duran, Amy Winehouse, Adele, Robbie Williams, Queens of the Stone Age, Bruno Mars, and many more. Mark has 7 Grammy Awards to his credit, including the prestigious Producer of the Year award for Amy Winehouse's Back to Black album, from which Ronson co-wrote many of the tracks. Ronson was born in Notting Hill, London, England, and moved to New York with his mother, sisters and stepfather when he was 8 years old. Today, Ronson works out of his New York-based recording studio. The BBC in England sent several crew members and cameramen over to Mark's New York studio to film and record this course, which is 6 hours and 42 minutes long, spread over 18 videos. Now, this isn't your typical online course or YouTube tutorial with a tutor walking you step by step through how to open Logic or Ableton, for example, create a project, import some live music and add some loops, use a few plugins like Reverb and Compressor before exporting it as an MP3 file. Far from it. Mark Ronson's music production course is way more than that. It's assumed that the viewer already has a decent level of knowledge and that you know what a DAW is, how to slice up samples, layer instruments, work with reverb and compression, and so on and so forth. About halfway through the course, Mark does walk us through his typical songwriting and producing process, starting with a simple breakbeat drum loop that Mark chose from his extensive royalty-free library for inspiration. He goes on to come up with a bass line for it, some synthesizer sounds, and then gets in a male vocalist to come up with some melody and lyrics and a female backing vocalist too. Mark demonstrates building up the song, adding extra kick, snare and hats to thicken up the existing drum loop sample while using typical plugins such as compression, reverb and EQ, for example. He walks us through his tools and techniques, mixing old instruments and synthesizers with more modern instruments and plugins, adding layers, textures and thickening up the sound. There's no doubt that Mark Ronson is a modest man, but while watching him work, it becomes abundantly clear that he's a creative genius. Watching Mark work his magic as he creates an entire song from scratch is something that has to be seen to be believed. The man really is a genius. During the course, Mark uses Pro Tools, but he explains that he only uses this particular DAW because it's the first one that he learned. But he also mentions Ableton, Logic and GarageBand many times throughout the course, as well as some of his favourite plugins such as FabFilter Pro Q3, whilst also mentioning other cool pieces of software such as Arturia's software synthesizers and much more. With regard to the equipment, Mark is quick to point out that brands, mates and models don't really matter and that you have to choose the right kit, instrument or plugin based on what you're trying to create. Mark has some vintage stuff like a Roland Juno 106, a Moog synth, Fender Rhodes and Wurlitzer pianos and a bunch of vintage drum machines. He also demonstrates more modern equipment and instruments, and he's a big fan of blending vintage sounds with more modern sounds. Some of his older gear is not massively expensive. He has a battered up acoustic nylon strung guitar that isn't even full size, it's a 3/4 size instrument, but Matt loves the warm tones that it produces, and he does explain that down tuning it a few semitones to get a deeper sound improves it greatly. Another guitar he has is a 60s knockoff of a well-known brand, but Mark goes on to explain that even a 60s or 70s knockoff can still be a decent instrument. During the course, I found Mark to be totally altruistic and incredibly generous with his knowledge, which is deep and vast. He's happy to openly admit that he's not a virtuoso on the keys or a shredder on the electric guitar, and that his kick drum technique is a bit lacking. Mark is happy to admit that he quite often plays in bass lines on his Fender bass or electric guitar parts at a slower tempo, which makes things easier and allows him to play them in more accurately. He then speeds them up in the DAW, a cool trick, and it's refreshing to see such a talented and well-known musician and producer to be so open about such things. Mark's attitude is whatever it takes to get it laid down, do it. We often see musicians and producers trying to impress us and their audiences by talking about Neapolitan sixths, Phrygian cadences, over-complex jazz chord progressions and so on and so forth, but you'll find none of that here. Mark's songwriting and producing process is incredibly simple, yet fantastically creative. He doesn't hold back on his trade secrets or what he has in his trick bag either. He's totally open about things, and he seems genuinely happy to be passing on his knowledge, songwriting and production techniques. And they're in abundance within this course. The course isn't just a bunch of anecdotes, which is often the case when a famous musician or producer pops up on YouTube. Mark gives a comprehensive nuts and bolts of his entire songwriting and producing process. Many of his tips and techniques will benefit more experienced producers for sure, so don't think this course is for beginners, because it's far from it. Again, it's assumed that the viewer already has an understanding of DAWs and various recording studio techniques. Mark is never patronising, he's totally chilled out and laid back, and he puts across all the information in easy to understand language without overcomplicating it. He does mention at one point about sidechaining, but instead of going into a tutorial on this during the videos, he simply explains that he's written up a detailed explanation of this in the downloadable PDF production course notes. He's a big fan of breaking the rules in pretty much every area of songwriting and music production. He's all for ignoring the rules if it benefits creativity and allows something new to shine through. I'll reference the part that Mark talks about setting the recording levels and how he often clips the levels on purpose to achieve a gritty and distorted sound. How many YouTube tutorials have we seen on how an EQ or vocal is supposed to be used, and the usual removing the bottom end so you don't have that clashing frequencies or that muddying up in the overall mix. Of course, Mark does this too, but he also explains that there are instances where the bottom end is actually boosted and not cut. He certainly does not work in such a way that his creativity is stuck in a little box. He breaks the rules, crashes through boundaries, and he pushes the envelope to the limit. Another of Mark's unorthodox techniques are cranking up the reverb on a guitar amp and recording that in a way that most people would say is wrong, and to add reverb in post, as once it's recorded with reverb it can't be taken away. Mark doesn't subscribe to this limited attitude, and he states that in one of the videos that by dialing in reverb and chorus or distortion on a physical amp with a mic in front of it will inspire the player, and it will yield a different kind of performance, emotionally and physically, as the guitarist reacts to the sounds coming from the amp, compared to if the guitarist had made the recording dry and flat, which can often result in a somewhat dry and flat performance. I couldn't agree more. Anybody who writes and produces songs, be it rock, pop, R&B, funk, hip-hop, rap, disco, whatever, will get so much from this course. It will open up a whole new toolbox of creativity for any songwriter or music producer. It will make you a better songwriter, and it has certainly changed how I'll be looking at my own songwriting techniques and processes from now on. And when I say songwriting, I don't mean writing stuff down on manuscript paper, I mean by throwing sounds down into your computer's DAW, taking inspiration from a simple breakbeat loop and experimenting, which is one of Ronson's techniques. In a nutshell, Mark's production course will unlock a truckload of creativity that you never knew you had, as he demonstrates a whole load of simple, yet incredibly effective and creative ways of working. Composing, sampling, coming up with fantastic new musical ideas, and mixing and mastering. This course costs just £80 as a one-off purchase, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I'll put a link in the description below, and no, it's not an affiliate link either. I'm genuinely infused about this course, and I just felt compelled to share this gem of a course with other songwriters and music producers. So check it out, or you'll be missing out. You've been watching Tech Raven. I'm Nigel Cooper. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you here again soon. Until then, keep on drumming, shredding, slapping, glissing, singing, or whatever it is you do on whatever instrument it is you do on. Bye for now.